Last time, Marius's election as consul led him to defy the will of the Senate and take control of Metellus's army. Today, we will see what he can do with it. When news of Marius's political machinations reached the ears of Metellus in Africa, his initial reaction was to refuse the orders and not hand over control of the army. If Marius could defy the will of the Senate, then couldn't Metellus defy the will of the people? Why should he obey such a patently illegal order? If he could defeat Jugurtha before Marius should arrive, then certainly that would be all that mattered. Too bad for Metellus, though. He was not able to coax Jugurtha into battle ever again. Meanwhile, the senators, whose will Marius had so recently defied, ordered Metellus to return to Rome, where he was to celebrate a triumph alongside Marius for their outstanding service in the Jugurthine War. The Senate likely offered this great honor to Metellus not because of his outstanding military achievements, but to stop him from withholding command of the army and further undermining the rule of law. There would be no formal handover of the army to spare the dignitas of Metellus. It was in this way that Marius assumed command of the Jugurthine campaign. Before leaving for Africa, he levied another round of recruits for his army, but Rome was short on men eligible for conscription. Firstly, most of Rome's soldiers were currently deployed far to the north to fight the Cimbri, and secondly, there were strict requirements that a Roman man must meet to serve in the military. Conscripts were Roman citizens who owned enough property to be counted in one of the 5 classes or ranks of Roman citizens. The wealthiest rank of the plebeians were the equites, because they had enough money to supply themselves both with horse and armor when called to serve in the army. The lowest ranks of the plebeian classes were the proletarii and the capiticensi. They were so poor that they were exempt from conscription altogether, unless in times of great emergency. While Marius couldn't legally conscript these poor citizens, he could accept them as volunteers. Since they were not official conscripts, the Senate would not pay them from the state treasury. No problem for Marius, though. He would just pay them from his own fortune. And in this moment, the Roman custom that would haunt the state for the rest of its existence was born. Forever after would Roman armies fight directly for their commander rather than for the ideal of the state. Having refreshed his army in this unprecedented way, Marius departed the capital for Africa. When he got there, he promptly resumed Metellus's old ineffective strategy of subjugating the countryside to stop the hit-and-run attacks of a pro-Jugurthine insurgency. Marius marched on the city of Cirta and reduced it to ruins, enslaving its women and children and executing every military-age male. This did not fix anything. Jugurtha was still on the loose in the vast and inhospitable terrain, and Marius was no closer to capturing him. The Romans would win several more battles against the Numidians, all of them to no effect. What Marius needed was Jugurtha in the flesh. That opportunity wouldn't present itself until Jugurtha fled to the court of his father-in-law, Bocchus. You may remember from episode 3 that this same Bocchus once betrayed Jugurtha to Lucius Bestia 5 years previous. Well, he was going to do it again. Bocchus saw Jugurtha as a troublemaker that had bitten off more than he could chew with his conflict against the Romans. Not only that, but if Jugurtha were to be gotten rid of, Bocchus could comfortably step into the role of king of Mauritania and Numidia, and become friend of the Roman people. For these reasons, Bocchus decided to betray Jugurtha to the Romans. But how best to do it? He had men in his court that were friends with one Roman, a man by the name of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the young quaestor in Marius's camp. Bacchus's courtiers were threatened by robbers one day while traveling through the desert. Luckily, they encountered Sulla, who gave them aid and chased off the robbers. Bacchus seized upon this story of an honorable Roman in Marius's army. All Sulla had to do was simply trust that Bacchus was a man of his word. Since apparently Sulla was a man of bold action, he took the risk and made his way to the court of Bacchus, where the king delivered Jugurtha into his hands. From there, he marched back to Marius's camp and duly handed Jugurtha over to his commander. For the rest of his life, Sulla would tell anyone and everyone that the credit for ending the Jugurthine War should go to him and him alone, and that Marius had nothing to do with any of it. He even went so far as to have a ring made, engraved with a scene of the capture of Jugurtha. In time, this would drive a wedge between Marius and Sulla, but for now, the men had other things to worry about. When news of the victory over Jugurtha reached Rome in 104 BCE, the people celebrated. It was the first piece of good military news that they had of late. In fact, just a year prior, the Romans had suffered a military disaster at the Battle of Arausio. The consul for that year, Gaius Marius Maximus, came north to reinforce the proconsul already serving in Gaul, one Quintus Servilius Caepio. From the outset, these two men did not get along. Caepio refused to cooperate with Malleus, apparently because Malleus was a novus homo, or new man, meaning that he was the first in his family to hold the consulship, and thus of a lower social caste than Caepio. The result was that instead of linking their respective armies, the two men struck separate camps on either side of the Rhone River. The ancient sources do not provide much detail about how this battle unfolded. Some say that Caepio, desiring to prevent Malleus from gaining personal glory, made a unilateral attack against the Cimbri. No matter, though. All the sources agree that the Roman army was destroyed nearly to the man. Caepio was later tried and convicted for his role in the fiasco, with all of his property being confiscated by the Senate. It was with this defeat fresh in the mind of the people that Marius was elected consul in absentia for the year 104 BCE. This too was an unprecedented step, as Roman law required men running for consul to appear in the capital to campaign in person. It also required a space of 10 years between consulships. This time, however, it appears that the military emergency in Gaul was enough to convince the Roman people to forego the law and make an exception for Marius. According to Plutarch, the Romans knew this election to be illegal, and it was not unopposed. He writes, The Romans, learning about the events at Arausio from many sources, called Marius to the command. He was appointed consul for the second time, although the law forbade that a man in his absence and before the lapse of a specified time should be elected again. Still, the people would not listen to those who opposed the election, for they considered that this would not be the first time that the law had given way before the demands of the general good, and that the present occasion demanded it no less imperatively than when they had made Scipio consul contrary to the laws, although at that time they were not fearful of losing their own city, but desirous of destroying that of the Carthaginians. When the news of his election to a successive consulship reached Marius in Africa, he returned to Rome at once and celebrated a triumph. After this brief period of celebration, Marius set off to assume his next command as governor of Gaul. In that capacity, he would deal with the German threat. Before setting off from Rome, Marius likely refitted his army again in the same unusual way that he had done before. He would need to turn this army of poor city dwellers into an elite fighting force. To do it, Marius would ban the customary practice of relying on baggage trains trailing the army to transport all of its equipment. Instead, Marius made sure every man in his army could carry everything he needed on his own back. Furthermore, Marius marched his soldiers in successively long journeys on their way north to Gaul, to get them used to moving quickly and for extended distances. Wherever he stopped, he encamped himself as if he was passing through enemy territory, and made his soldiers do combat exercises, so that by the time they reached Gaul, they were a corps of well-trained professional soldiers. This led some of Marius's political opponents to brand this army Marius's mules. For the rest of 104 BCE, Marius trained his troops at their new base of operations, Aquae Sextiae, or modern Aix-en-Provence. There, Marius anticipated an invasion into Italy by the Germans any day now. He and the army trained and waited, and then trained some more. But the invasion never came. A year passed, and it was time for consular elections again. While he should have continued his command as a proconsul, the people voted Marius in absentia into the consulship once again. The logic behind this latest illegal consulship was likely due to the recent example of Caepio and Malleus. If Marius were to be proconsul, as the law prescribed, he would then be of a lower rank than the new consul for the year. If that new consul were to be deployed to support Marius, what guarantee did anyone have that Marius would cooperate with him, let alone hand over control of his army that he was personally paying for? No, better to avoid the problem altogether and grant Marius another illegal consulship. That will certainly help the Roman Republic in the long run, won't it? For the next year, nothing much changed. The Germans still were nowhere to be found. Certainly, they would make a try for Italy. But for now, it's almost time for consular elections again, and Marius is still consul. At least for this next election, the Senate made him come back to Rome to campaign. There, he enlisted the help of the tribune of the plebs, Lucius Saturninus. The two struck a private deal for their mutual benefit. Saturninus sought the support of Marius's veterans, while Marius sought Saturninus's power as tribune to help him retain the consulship. When the plebeian council met, Saturninus called publicly for Marius to be put forth again as the candidate for the year. Marius made a show of declining the offer, and according to the plan, Saturninus accused him of being a traitor to the country. If he refused the nomination and abandoned his troops in such a time of great peril, certainly he must be a traitor. Marius delivered a stirring speech, espousing his love of country, acknowledging that while he didn't want to break the law, his service was required by it, and serve he would, if only the people would allow him. In this way, Marius won his fourth total and third consecutive, highly illegal consulship. Join me next time to learn what Marius means to do to the Germans in service of the Roman state. I'm Matt Lupu. Thanks for listening.